Hi everyone, it's Dr. Ramani. Welcome back to this YouTube channel on narcissism and narcissistic relationships. One thing that often comes up in people who reach out to me with their questions is this question of this issue that comes up around narcissistic families and how they feel so similar to alcoholic families. And some people who grow up in alcoholic or addicted families will say, this sounds a lot like a narcissistic family and vice versa. But there's some things that come up in families where addiction and alcoholism is present, and sort of actually, honestly, the way hope plays out in those families, that can be quite different than we see in narcissistic families. So let's break some of that down. There is so much confusion when there is narcissism and addiction in the same family system, especially in the parents in that system. Honestly, it is almost impossible to tell where one begins and the other ends. Many people I have worked with through my years as a therapist did have alcoholism in their families. And these families, alcoholic families, if you will, or families characterized by addiction, are systems riddled with denial, enabling, triangulation, secret keeping, shame, fear, unpredictability, and chaos. All of the same patterns we see in a narcissistic family system, with one notable difference. There's a strange kind of, if you will, hope that can sometimes course through an alcoholic or addiction-riddled family system. Perhaps the idea that this family would have been different were it not for this one behavior or this clear disease of addiction. If the addiction was treated and the addict could remain sober, the drug or alcohol use stopped, then there actually could have been an opportunity for this to be a normal family system like it could be on the sober days. The belief that it was the alcohol or the drugs that ruined the family. And while people do not emerge from family systems characterized by drug or alcohol use unscathed, there was a different sort of hope hanging out there. That idea if only the addiction wasn't there. And if a person grows up in one of these family systems and is committed to never drinking or using themselves, there is the tidy belief that I will not replicate these cycles. So despite the incredible similarity between narcissistic family systems and addiction family systems, the patterns that we witness in alcohol or addiction impacted family systems and narcissistic family systems, as well as the fallout and the impact on the survivors, there is a different narrative that can emerge. I know that in both cases, children who survive these systems are left with a feeling of being not enough. And in fact, many survivors of childhood parents who are alcoholics or addicts of any kind are left with the painful ideation that if I was enough, maybe they would stop drinking, as though the child could have some control over this addictive behavior. The child who grows up in the narcissistic family system, there's no discernible alcohol or drug use to point out. So there may very well be much more confusion and a different kind of a twist on hope. The hope for the child from the narcissistic family system is that maybe today will be different, but not clear why. There's no drugs or alcohol. It's just sort of like, maybe today will be different. Maybe if I behave better. Maybe if I do better. Maybe if my parent has a good day, then we could have a good day. There are often other good days to look back at and generate hope in that way, but there's nothing to point to. Nothing like, when mommy drinks, she's mean. The child growing up in the narcissistic home is not clear what's going to set their parent off or what they're dealing with. There is no drink or pipe or cigarette or pill to connect the bad behavior to. Obviously, the worst hell is when there is both addiction and narcissism on board. Children from those environments will often enter adulthood with complex trauma. A body that holds in the trauma and fear, even as a mind is sort of trying to convince you otherwise. There is a double cruelty to these systems because the child may believe that, oh, great, no drink, no drug, maybe it'll be okay today. Not knowing that the narcissism doesn't dissipate, and in fact may be worse when the person doesn't have drugs or alcohol to regulate. This also applies when these are adult relationships. Having a partner with an addiction versus having a partner with narcissism versus having a partner with both. Something discernible, like drug or alcohol use, may result in a little less self-blame than narcissism, which most people don't understand when they are initially in it. When both are present, it is a hellish relational landscape. The crossroads of addiction and narcissism magnifies the negative outcomes we witness in these relationships. Greater volatility, greater risk of physical violence, more dysregulation, higher highs and lower lows, and a larger thing about which to justify. This idea of it's the drinking, and if they get sober, it's all going to be fine. It drives a different kind of hope. Many people ask me, are these the same? Is one different? I think the impacts of narcissistic parents or parents living with addictive patterns are quite similar. But the way hope and justification may behave in these systems is quite different. And in cases where both are present, both narcissism and an addiction pattern, the narcissism may get missed because the behaviors associated with addiction are so in your face and identifiable. The devastation often occurs when a person from one of these systems may see the parent, family member, or partner get sober and still behave in an abusive manner, a moment which often brings torrents of confusion and grief. It's not a competition, and all of these are painful and difficult ways to be raised or to have to relate. Hope can have a different architecture based on the assumptions we make about the emotionally abusive patterns in a home and what led to it. But I'm sure some of you listening to this had family systems characterized both by drug or alcohol use and narcissism. And there you can't tell where one ends and the other begins, like I said. But for many people who grew up in family systems where it really was about the drug and alcohol use, it was a different kind of holding out. This idea of someday this pattern, this behavior might end, this disease might get treated. And also something to pin it to, that over time children might learn, daddy drinks, mommy uses. And while it still does not alleviate the psychological horrors that is for a child, it's very different than in the narcissistic family system, where a lot of kids walk around and say, I don't know what this is, and then fall into those trauma-bonded patterns of justification and self-blame. Both patterns are incredibly difficult to grow up with, but they definitely play out in somewhat different ways. Thanks again.